Tara Resnick and Hazel Sebastian. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to both of them. Tara is a social worker with the Psychogeriatric Resource Consultation Program. Prior to joining the PRC team, she was a social worker in a long-term care home for several years, where she led the behavioral support program and was actively involved in developing the team's capacity to support individuals with responsive behaviors. Hazel is also a social worker with the Psychogeriatric Resource Consultation Program. Hazel has many years of experience working in the field of geriatrics in multiple different settings, including psychiatry, geriatric rehab, stroke, complex continuing care, and acute care. Both Tara and Hazel are experienced facilitators with several of the key training programs we offer within our behavioral support system, such as GPA and PIECES. So before we get started, I'd like to let you know how to engage with our presenters today. So please type any questions or comments that you have in the chat box at any time. We will start our questions around 4:30, 4:45. A common question that we get asked is, can we have a copy of the slides and a recording of this webinar? And absolutely you can. We'll be sending them to the attendees and also post them on our website and YouTube channel. And with that, I'd like to pass it off to Tara.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We know just how busy everyone is and how difficult it can often be to find the time to join these webinars. So we truly appreciate your participation and you being here today. And that being said, let's get started. So we're here today to talk about, to focus rather, I'll say, on understanding and supporting residents who wander. So this is actually the third in the series of webinars that we've been offering to folks who are redeployed into long-term care, but also those who may permanently be working in long-term care, as well as other sectors. So everyone is welcome, of course. That being said, just a reminder that if you were unable to join us for webinar 1 and 2 of this series, please make sure to head over to the RGP website where you'll find a link to our YouTube channel and you will be able to watch both webinars. Also, if you have anyone you feel would benefit from joining this webinar who was unable to make it live today, this will also be posted on the YouTube channel as well. So we'd like to start by thanking you, every single one of you, for supporting teams in long-term care and caring for the residents during the pandemic. You're doing invaluable and really important work, and without you, to be quite honest, I'm sure I don't know what we do. So the work you do is so important in supporting older adults living in long-term care and making a difference in so many lives. So thank you so much. We'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of the Toronto Central Behavioral Supports Ontario Coordinating Office, as well as the Long-Term Care BSOT team and the Toronto Central and Central Lynn BSO leads in developing this curriculum, without whom we would have not been able to gather a lot of the really rich and valuable information that we're going to share with you today, and they felt was important to share with you as well. I'd like to talk a little bit about housekeeping. So as Lindsay mentioned, the slide deck and tip sheet will be shared with you shortly following the training. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, which you can access at the RGP Toronto website. Please make sure, as a reminder, to type your questions related to the content into the chat box. As Lindsay mentioned, there will be an opportunity for question and answers at the end of this webinar. However, we certainly don't expect you to wait till then. If you have questions come up while we are speaking, please don't hesitate. Feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll definitely be able to address all of them during our question and answer period. We do also recognize that there may be some case-specific examples that require resolution that you may have already encountered in your redeployed role. Unfortunately, we won't be able to address those cases today just because of time constraints, but we do encourage you to connect with the behavior supports in your facility where you've been redeployed to, as well as any external supports that may be supporting the facilities you have been redeployed to. Let's talk a little bit about our goals for today. So firstly, we want to review the concept of responsive behaviors. We want to also explore possible reasons for residents to wander, and then we'd also like to consider ways to support a resident who is wandering. As a reminder, any questions that arise throughout this webinar, please feel free to pop them into the chat room. We do have somebody who will be monitoring it. And now we'd like to get to know a little bit about you. We would love to know who's with us today and a little bit about your background experience. So we are going to give you a couple moments to answer some of the poll questions we have for you. Carrie, if you wouldn't mind pulling those up, please. So if you could take a few minutes just to let us know what your role is in your organization or the organization you've been redeployed to. All right, so, well, we have PRCs, we've got some nurses, we've got some physicians, some admin staff, which is awesome. You know, I always say that we're all the experts in our roles, and when we bring all of these expert minds together is when the real magic happens. So thank you again for being here. Next poll question, please. Okay, interesting. So we have varied years of experience in the audience today. And what's important to mention about this is that when we have a look at this slide, whether you've been in the field for, 6 months or over 21 years, you have a wealth of knowledge and experiences to share today. So if you're comfortable, please don't hesitate to engage in the chat box. And next poll question, please. Wow. I have to say, in all of our webinars, this is the first time we've had the majority of folks who've supported people living with dementia. So that's awesome. And for some of us who may not have, that's great too. That's why we're here today. So thank you for sharing. And finally, last poll question, please. Okay, awesome. So 64% of you have attended the other 2 webinars in the series. 5 of you haven't, which is also fine. We're gonna give you a little bit of that foundational knowledge about responsive behavior, so not to fret, and you can always check them out on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much, Carrie. So now that we know a little bit about who we have amongst us today, let's jump right in. Let's start talking about this idea of responsive behaviors. So in dementia care, behaviors are viewed as responses to unmet needs, and that's why we call them responsive behaviors. So people living with dementia are sometimes labeled by their behavior, unfortunately. So for example, they may be called aggressive or inappropriate, maybe a hoarder or agitated, etc. And these labels can be super judgmental, and they can really prevent carers from seeking the meaning behind the behavior. What's really important to remember as well about behavior is that behavior ought to be regarded as a form of communication when you're supporting people living with dementia. If I always use the example of pain. So if I was in pain, but I was unable to say, I've got a really bad headache, Lindsay, do you have a Tylenol? We have to ask ourselves how we think I might show you that. So I would likely be showing you that with my behavior. And that's just one of the examples I always use. The facilities I support would likely call me the pain police. They usually do. That's the running joke. So that's just one of many examples. But the idea is, if I couldn't tell you what my need was and I needed that need to be met, I would absolutely be showing you with my behavior. So when we come to sort of accept that, we realize that all behavior has meaning, and a large percentage of those living with dementia and long-term care will have some form of responsive behavior. And remembering this really helps us to move away from judging the person and who's exhibiting the behavior, and helps us move towards understanding their actions and remembering that they've got that purpose, they've got that meaning. There is no such thing as meaningless behavior. I know sometimes responsive behaviors can seem as though they're sort of just random or unprovoked or meaningless, but they're not. All behavior has meaning. And that's sort of our guiding principle to remind us that there is a reason for the behavior. And that also helps us to recognize and value that the person who is living with dementia has the ability to express their experience, and is oftentimes might be doing that with their behavior. We know that this work can be time consuming and resource intensive. However, it also can be super rewarding when we discover the meaning and address those needs. So I always say spend the time to save the time. When we just sort of band-aid the behavior we're seeing rather than really doing that deep dive below the surface to understand what the root cause is, or that unmet need, we're not actually going to help to resolve the behavior. What we're doing is just sort of a short-term solution. But if we spend the time to save the time and we really try to understand, what is that unmet need? Why is Tara behaving the way she is? Not only are we going to help that person's quality of life because that behavior is going to resolve and whatever that unmet need will be met, but we've just made a massive difference in someone's life. So it can be super rewarding, although we definitely recognize that it can be time consuming as well. And this concept of behavioral support is derived from over 20 years of evidence-based research. And it also sort of highlights that behaviors occur due to the changes in our brain and the effect on specific brain structures. So again, that idea that they're never just meaningless behaviors. So that said, we want to hear from you. We want to pick your brains, if you will. We're wondering what you think some reasons for residents to wander might be, and keeping in mind that there is absolutely no right or wrong answer. Whatever you feel could be a possible cause for wandering works for us. So that being said, if you wouldn't mind heading over to www.menti.com, and that link is on your screen right now. So menti.com. Entering code 929995. And Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind just typing that code into the chat box before I switch over to the Menti website, that might be helpful for those who may have missed this. And I'm going to ask you to put in 3 or more. Please feel free to put as many as you'd like. 3 or more reasons you feel a resident may wander. And I'm just going to pull that Menti screen up for us. And I see it's already moving. I love it. All right. So I'm going to give you some time. Don't rush. Something important to mention about this word cloud, of course, is that the more common responses are going to be larger font. So just helping you sort of make sense of what's on our screen right now. So what have we got so far? Pain, boredom. I love pain. Hello, I'm the pain police. Emotional issues, wanting to go home, hunger, exercise. I love this answer. We had it in this morning session too. I always sort of think of myself, I teach spin classes part-time as a hobby, and I am 100% going to be that resident in long-term care who's just constantly walking. And I hope people don't think I'm wandering because I need exercise. That's just who I am. They need to use the bathroom understimulated. Hungry, wrong shoes. I love that. Absolutely. Love to walk. A lot of wanting to go home. Lonely. Scared. Emotional issues. As a side note, I hope you're all starting to see that when I said we are all the experts in our field, I wasn't just saying it because you guys are bang on. Constipation, unfamiliar environment, seeking intimacy. As you can tell, I'm really excited about this. Delirium. Anger. Itchy pant tags, absolutely. So that discomfort piece. Checking up on others. I'm just now sort of naming out the ones we've missed because we've got a lot of common themes here. Looking for an exit. Lack of familiar environment, fear. Just making sure I didn't miss any. Past routine. Awesome. You guys are brilliant. I love these responses, and you're right on the money with these. End of workday. Now I'm getting super excited, if you can't tell, for Hazel to take us through the possible causes, because you're nailing almost every one of them. Agitated, looking for mother, bored. Okay. So I just wanted to give you all a chance, want to make sure we're not still moving and everyone had an opportunity to enter. Oh, bird watching. Sorry, I missed that one. Good one. I just wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity to enter their responses. And thank you all so much for participating. What this screen and this really helps us understand is that we are all have the knowledge. We all understand the different reasons for behavior, for residents rather to wander. And that being said, I want to pass it over to Hazel, who's going to walk us through some of those reasons and some possible supports to discover. So thank you everyone again for participating. Hazel, over to you.
Thank you, Tara. It'll take a few minutes, 1 minute probably, to bring up my slides. Just bear with me.
Ooh, while you're doing that, I just noticed going to work, a really important one as well on the Menti screen.
Thank you. Now, as you can see in the Menti poll, you all have identified many common reasons for why resident may wander. We are now going to elaborate on a few of them, most common ones, and discuss some ways for us to support the residents who are wandering. This is not an exhaustive list. We would encourage you to speak with the care team at the home you have been redeployed to get more information about the individual you are assisting. So, a common reason for people to be leaving their rooms and walking around the unit or home area, as it's called in long-term care, walking around the unit might be because they are looking for something to eat or drink, as these would not usually be stored in their rooms. To redirect a resident back to his or her room, you could say something like, "Are you looking for something to eat? I can get you lunch." Or, "Let's go to your room and I will get you a nice cup of coffee." It's important to know, though, what would be desirable to the person and to use that to redirect them. Remembering that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach when supporting people with dementia, and the importance of knowing what is preferred by the individual. And also to keep in mind, not every intervention will work for every resident. So as much as possible, intervention should be geared to meet the specific need of the person. If you suspect the person is leaving the room in search of something to eat or drink, one of the strategies can be offering food or beverages on a regular basis to minimize wandering for this reason. Another common reason for a resident to wander might be that they are looking for a washroom. In the previous webinars of this series, we talked about the thinking changes that may occur in the person living with dementia. And these changes may contribute to the person being unable to find the washroom in their own room or in the common areas of the home. Some examples of ways to support would be asking, "Are you looking for are you looking for the washroom? I would be happy to show you where it is." It's also important to remember to pay attention to the person's nonverbal messages. For example, if they are saying no, but tugging at their pants or suddenly become increasingly restless, it may be a sign that they do in fact need to use the washroom, and you can try to redirect them. In order to help the resident to find their own washroom, make it more visible by leaving the door wide open and lights on. Pain could be another reason for wandering, and Tara has mentioned this too, and you have mentioned it in the Menti poll. Now, can you take a minute to answer the question, do you live with a chronic pain? Kerry, can you launch a poll? Oh, wow. 50% of the people in the group have said yes, and another 50 do not have the experience yet. And we are saying yet because as we are aging, we are at higher risk of living with diseases associated with pain like arthritis, osteoporosis, fractures, skin breakdown, etc. And if 50% of us are living with pain, and considering our average age is much younger, what do you think that number must look like for residents in the long-term care homes? Pain is often under-recognized and highly prevalent in the people we are supporting. Many people have pain medications that are prescribed to be given only if the resident requests them. The term used is PRN. Now, thinking about individuals who are living with memory loss, consider this. Would your resident remember that they have a prescription for pain medication? Or would they remember who to ask? As a result, we know that pain is vastly undertreated, but we also know that pain is strongly correlated with behaviors such as hitting out during care and even wandering. The question we can ask the person is, do you have pain? Or more simply, are you hurting? Knowing your resident's medical history will also help you to know when you should be considering pain. This is also another opportunity for you to collaborate with the care team and refer to the plan of care. It's also crucial to watch for the nonverbal cues that may indicate pain. For example, facial expressions of discomfort, restlessness, fidgeting, or rubbing or tapping a spot on their body, or continuing to walk despite clear physical distress, such as walking with the limp. The last common reason we will cover is understimulation or boredom. It's important to remember, especially during this time of COVID-19, residents may be more socially isolated than normal, and that residents may be looking for company or for something to do. Understimulation is a common cause for wandering and a good indication that the resident needs to be engaged. An example of how to redirect the resident back to their room would be to say, I was looking for you. Would you like to come with me? Or insert whatever is meaningful to that person. In that moment, you can look around the person's room for ideas on topics of conversation that interest them. For example, family photos, artwork, CDs, books, magazines, etc. You can point to a picture and ask them, who is this in the picture? Can you tell me more about them? And you can show interest to know more about their background and the people who are important for them in their life. If it is a resident who you suspect is leaving the room often because they are understimulated or bored, it is a good idea to collaborate with the activation team to get a better idea of their likes, dislikes, and what they find meaningful. For example, favorite TV shows, movies, music, and so on. Other possible reasons for wandering are listed here. The pandemic has forced residents to be isolated from loved ones and co-residents. Now, communal dining and activities are on hold, which increases the risk for social isolation and loneliness. So think of engaging in a friendly conversation when trying to redirect them or to their room or even during care interactions. a short conversation can go a long way. It is important to be mindful of where we are having our conversations with each other, conversations with each other. For example, a resident isolated in their room, hearing staff speaking in the hallway, may become curious and want to leave the room to join the conversation. It's also helpful to scan the resident's environment to look for possible reasons that could be prompting the individual to wander. For example, a flickering light that needs to be changed or the temperature in their room. A resident could be wandering because they don't recognize their room. For example, if the resident's room does not have a lot of personal items or is not inviting, the resident may not associate their room with home and may be more inclined to leave the room in search of home or a place of comfort. Shift change could prompt wandering as residents perceive that it's time for them to leave too. So be aware of those who need to be engaged or redirected during shift change. Staff should also be mindful to leave the home area from doors less visible to the residents. As mentioned previously, it is good to consult with the care team to review the residents' social information to give you some background about their life story or social history. As an example, someone who was always active and used to exercise, you may find they're actively pacing around their room. If there is no risk attached to the residents pacing in their room, consider leaving them alone. However, if there is a risk, you may need to find a way to redirect them by engaging them in a meaningful conversation or activity. Normal wandering or walking should not be stopped. An intervention is needed if the resident is leaving the long-term care or entering unsafe or other resident spaces or result in injuries, falls, excessive fatigue, or agitation. Always introduce yourself to the person. Due to the loss of memory, the person with dementia may not remember the first time you worked with them. Each time you come to them, it's like the person is seeing you for the first time. Now, individuals in wheelchair may propel themselves around the home area. Ensure you get at the person's eye level from a safe distance. Standing above a person can communicate intimidation and power differential, which can be perceived as a threat. So be mindful of how you start your interaction. If the person is visually impaired, you want to use your voice to get their attention at the beginning of the interaction. Whereas with someone who is hard of hearing, you want to get their attention by using visual cues such as waving your hand to greet them. We never want to startle someone by getting too close or touching them before we have their attention. Now, if you can take a minute to respond in the chat box, what are some verbal or non-verbal signs that indicate a resident may be getting upset? I'll give you a minute. You have identified many of the verbal and non-verbal expressions you may see in the person you're working with. So be mindful of the individual's verbal and non-verbal cues. Step back and give them personal space if you observe they are upset. Always avoid correcting mistakes or telling them they're wrong. For example, don't go there, that's not your room. Stay in your room. Do I have to tell you many times? You can't leave your room. These are command statements. If someone said these statements to you, how would you respond? I'm sure none of us would like it. Again, we want to emphasize that this is not an exhaustive list of supportive interaction strategies. There are going to be those times when you're trying these hands-on strategies, but you are still finding they're continuing to wander. So please keep in mind that there are behavioral supports that can be called upon. Most long-term care homes, there's a system of supports for long-term care in helping to manage responsive behaviors. Residents with responsive behaviors have a behavior plan of care which members of the team have access to. So it's important for you to know that you can look at the care plan prior to starting your work to support the resident. We want to acknowledge that the behavior support lead role has been instrumental in the management of behaviors in long-term care homes. So please speak with your host organizations to find out more about specific supports available to them. Now, on this slide, the first three websites provide information on COVID-19. To access the resources on covidcarelearning.ca, you will need to create an account. The fourth website has guidelines specific to wandering behavior. Dementia Toolkit has ethical guidelines around wandering behavior, and it is an assessment tool to help with the decision-making process. We want to thank you for participating in this webinar. We also want to thank you for helping out in long-term care homes, which is so essential. Please tell us in the poll whether this webinar was helpful. And in the chat box, please list any other topics you would like to see covered in future webinars. We also want to remind you, if you have missed either of the two previous webinars, they're recorded and can be accessed at rgptoronto.ca or RGP Toronto YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara and Hazel, for sharing your experience and understanding and supporting residents who wander. You guys both covered some very important information and really highlighted that the need to find the need behind the behavior. So we do have some time for questions now. So please feel free to use the chat box. And just a reminder to change the to selection from all panelists to all panelists and attendees so that we can see the questions, okay? So we don't have any questions yet, so I'm gonna start us off with one. And I'm thinking maybe Tara, you could speak to this one first. So you spoke about loneliness for a possible cause for wandering, and I'm wondering what some of the strategies are that you could recommend to try and address loneliness as a need.
Absolutely, thank you, Lindsay. So we recognize that loneliness is a really common unmet need under normal circumstances, but then when we tie in our the current context of COVID-19, it's obviously something we have to consider quite seriously. So a couple of strategies we can try, of course, are to use video conferencing options when and if they're available. So things like FaceTime or Zoom or whatever might be accessible to you at your home. Certainly doesn't mean that or need to mean rather that your resident has, an iPhone, for example, or a computer, recognizing that a lot won't have that. But borrowing an iPad from the recreation department or from whichever department might have one, and video conferencing in any loved ones can be super helpful during a time like this. We mentioned during the webinar as well, just that friendly conversation. You folks are in the long-term care home right now at a time where visitors can't come and residents, of course, are feeling a little bit more isolated than they normally would. So we cannot stress enough how far a little friendly conversation goes when you're supporting your residents in long-term care. So whether that's during care, as we said, or maybe when you greet them in the hallway, just engaging them in friendly conversation, asking them questions like how they are, or complimenting them on their shirt or how beautiful their room is, asking them how they feel. Oftentimes, a little bit of reassurance and that supportive sort of chat will really help combat that unmet need when we think about loneliness. We've also heard from other long-term care homes that we support that they have actually tried to socially engage their residents by conducting hallway activities. So that keeps the residents in their room. They'd stay in their doorway, for example, and thinking about doing things like having concerts in the hallway, or exercises in the hallway, talent shows in the hallway, anything that would really help to socially engage your residents during this very isolated time would be useful strategies as well. Hazel, is there anything you'd like to add?
You've covered everything that I would think of. And one of the things that my home does is gets them to write some letters to the family members, because some family members may not have the technology to use video conferencing, but telephone calls are also another good way to connect, but also writing letters. And I'm sure family members would love to receive those letters.
Another thing I sort of just thought of when you were talking, so just to add one more suggestion, having people pre-record video messages. So if you don't have access to that video conferencing technology, a pre-recorded short video of their loved ones or anyone meaningful in their lives, just saying things like, hi, I miss you, I love you, I'm looking forward to seeing you. Just seeing that face and hearing from them can really make a huge difference right now.
I can add an example. We have a resident who used to always, when the daughter came, she used to say rosary. And at one time we had recorded that. So now when the daughter is not able to visit, we play that rosary and she thinks she's with the daughter and she keeps saying the prayers.
And I know a lot of these things may seem sort of simplistic, but they make such a huge difference in the day-to-day lives of our residents right now. And a little really can go a long way.
Great, ladies. Thank you so much. I heard some amazing, just, sort of tips in that. Some of the things I heard was just really making that connection and having that friendly conversation with the person with dementia, providing that reassurance, some things like hallway activities, the pre-recorded messages, handwritten letters. Those things are so they make a person feel so, so much better. Some other things I was thinking of is just some purposeful activities, so getting them to fold towels or sorting newspapers, folding socks, like letting them do those types of things. So great job.
In one of my
sorry, go ahead.
I have one more example. At one of the homes I go to, they have mom chores. Moms are always used to doing chores at home. So after a meal, they'll ask them, give them a wet cloth to go around and wipe the tables and say, would be very helpful to me if you can help out, or pushing the chairs back. And one resident goes around putting bibs in, or the clothing protectors on the table. So they have some purpose and goal-oriented, meaningful activities you do that makes sense to them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We did get a question in the chat box. So how do you redirect those who are seeking companionship, for lack of a better word? Who would like to take that one first?
So, I'm happy to start, Hazel, if you don't mind, and then I'll pass it back over to you. Companionship is a basic human need. We all need that, during COVID-19, but we need that every day. And at a time like this, when residents can't congregate and be in activities together and, you know, socialize in the dining room and all of these little things that we sort of, this pandemic has helped us sort of realize we may have taken for granted. I'll just sort of circle back to that example of what a difference it makes when we, as redeployed or, you know, regular staff, have those conversations and, you know, just validating somebody. So sometimes we just really need to be heard. And you know what, I'm gonna rephrase that. We always really need to be heard. And when somebody's feeling that way and they're missing companionship and they're looking for that connection, something as simple as having, you know, a 5-minute chat with them can make such a massive difference. I think of myself all the time, and if I were a resident in long-term care, being the sort of chatty social person that I'm sure you can all tell I am by now, if someone was providing personal care, it would make such a difference to me if they just asked me how I was feeling or how I was doing, or, you know, what I was looking forward to watching on TV tonight. Any sort of interaction would really help me feel connected. And if I were missing companionship, it would really help me feel as though that need was being met. Hazel, anything you want to add?
Yeah, a couple of things that come to my mind that are done in a home that I visit, that they have robotic pet therapy. So they get a lot out of that. Another thing I've seen them doing is they take their laptop, sit next to a person as they're recording, as they're doing their documentation. They keep talking and interacting. So that's the one-on-one they provide, because they don't have other means of getting extra staff to do one-on-one. So they have been creative in finding ways to provide that companionship.
And, you know, I'll sort of piggyback off that. As redeployed staff, if you're noticing some of these unmet needs in the residents you're supporting, I would encourage you to really feel empowered to advocate and go back to that care team at the facility you're redeployed to and say, you know what, I've noticed Tara seems a bit lonely, or I've noticed that Tara, you know, is hungry at this time of day and she's searching for food, or whatever it is that you're noticing. I would really empower you to advocate for your residents, because you're going to just make that huge difference I was talking about earlier.
Awesome, ladies. Great suggestions. I know that I would love the robotic pet if it was me. We also have someone in the chat saying they also use doll therapy and robotic pet therapy at their home to support their residents. So thank you so much for sharing. Another question that we got, we have a question in the chat box. So how to redirect residents who are more frisky or looking for sexual interaction?
Another basic human need, and if it's okay, I'm actually going to turn this over to Hazel, because Hazel's been doing a lot of work on a committee who meets surrounding sexual expressions. But I will just say before I do that I think it's important for all of us to remember that is a basic human need. So it makes a lot of sense. And Hazel?
Yeah, I think need for intimacy is never going to go away. It will be with us until we die. And sometimes we may quickly think this is leading to sexual intercourse, rather than this is a nice friendship developing, people holding hands, companionship, support, sharing. It could be many other things, and just a good friendship where people enjoy being with each other. But however, sometimes our own biases, or maybe we have to protect them, and we have these laws that we have to follow in long-term care homes, and nobody taking advantage of the other one. And so without preconceived notions, we may think, oh, this is going to be sexuality, this is going to lead to something that we don't want to, and we may try to interrupt those relationships, because it all comes down to relationships, and relationships are very, very important for our own existence, I think.
And something I'll add to that, just sort of thinking about the current climate in COVID-19, those relationships can't really happen right now, as we know, right? The hand-holding and which is so important, I think, for us to consider. It never hurts to just remind the resident, and keeping in mind that you may be supporting people with short-term memory impairment, and you may have to repeat it over and over, but just something as simple as saying, you know, there's a virus going around and we want to keep you safe, as soon as it's safe to do so, we'll all be back together again. And something like that, you may again have to repeat over and over, but I think it also gives the residents that hope and helps them understand that this is temporary, it's not permanent. So just something to consider as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Tara and Hazel. Yeah, it just points to that emotional connection, right? And us needing to provide that to the residents as well. So amazing. We did have a question earlier at the 9:30 webinar. It was around, is offering food or a diversion placating or patronizing a resident? Tara, maybe you would like to talk about this first.
Sure, and it's a really valid question, but I think what we need to remember in long-term care is that, number one, a resident's room will not ever completely look the same as their home would. And what I mean by that is there's no kitchen. So whereas you and I can get up right now if we're hungry and grab a snack, or, you know, grab a glass of water in the middle of the night if we're thirsty, somebody living in long-term care may not be able to do that. And to take it a step further, somebody living with dementia may not be able to do that. So when we think about folks who are wandering and we consider those very, again, basic and often unmet needs, when we offer that food or we offer them something to drink, we're advocating for them. And we're saying, you know, is this what you're looking for? Without obviously saying that, but by offering them the food or offering them something to drink, if that is in fact what they're looking for, we've met that need, which again is really what we are all sort of trying to do every day. Hazel, anything you wanted to add to that?
A few things I want to add to what Tara has already stated. Our residents at that age, at any meal, they don't eat a lot. They'll eat, you know, a limited amount, and they'll be hungry again. And if they're wandering, they may be, you know, digesting those whatever they ate quickly, and they may be looking for food. As well as we have to remember, food and beverages are also meet our emotional need for nurturing, for comfort. You know, when I feel like I want a snack, I just go and get one. But they do not have that. It has to be provided for them. So I know most of the homes have that additional snack time and snacks being available and delivered to them.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We just got another question from Karen. So residents who like to wander and or walk outside their room who are COVID positive, how would you keep them isolated? Good question, Karen.
Yeah.
Great question. Sorry, Hazel, go ahead.
No, it's a tough one. And I can only talk from the point of view of what I've seen some people are doing. What they have done is cohorting them or putting them in an area where there are other COVID positive patients. So if they're, residents, if they're wandering around those people, then there is limited risk. So putting the COVID positive residents together and keeping the others safe will be interesting. And we know from one other home, a behavior lead does, what she does is she has all these non-COVID wandering patients, residents in the auditorium. And she allows them to auditor, she supervises and she allows them to wander. And she has activities set up in all the corners of the room at the, you know, and so they will stop by, they'll do something and then move on again, but they will be kept busy between meals, like morning breakfast till lunchtime. And then after lunch, they have a nap. And then when they're back to wandering again, she has them again in the big auditorium for them to have enough space to walk around.
And something I'll just add to that, which is really important to consider, and at the risk of becoming a bit repetitive, we have to remember to always be looking for those unmet needs. So when someone's wandering, whether they're COVID positive or not, there's a reason they're wandering. And we have to put on our detective hats, if you will, and try to really better understand that unmet need. Why is Tara wandering? What does she need? And while yes, that is time consuming as we've identified, and it may not always be easy to figure out, once we do that and we meet that need, the likelihood is that the wandering will resolve. Another thing to consider as well is keeping people meaningfully engaged, as Hazel said, but we can do that in their room too. So something to consider also is working with the recreation department to try to see if there are any sort of self-directed activities that residents can engage in the room to keep them stimulated. Because when we're understimulated, what do? We look for something to do, right? Again, I'm already sort of thinking of myself in long-term care, and that will be me 100%. So keeping people meaningfully engaged is super important when we think of wandering, and also looking for those unmet needs. Wandering is a very challenging behavior to manage in long-term care. I know in my past life, I can say it was one of the most challenging behaviors to manage. What we're suggesting won't always work. I would say it will hopefully work most times, but a lot of the time it is that trial and error, and it's important to really spend the time to save the time.
As we had said earlier, that there is an intrinsic need in certain stages of dementia for them to wander, walk around. And if it is not unsafe, it's safe and it's not disruptive, it's better to allow them to walk or provide them opportunities to walk, create some pathways where they can safely wander around, and sometimes even joining them and having a social conversation while they are talking. And if it needs to be redirected, with that social conversation, you can redirect them to wherever you want them to be.
Great.
Sorry, Lindsay, I just want to add one more thing thinking about this. We have to keep in mind that we may need to continuously repeat, right? Repeat. And that is sometimes never ending, but super important. So we may have to say there's a very contagious virus going around. We want you to keep safe. In order for you to keep safe, let's go into your room and do this, or let's put on your favorite movie, or whatever it is that's meaningful to that person. But we may have to repeat that multiple times if you're supporting someone with that short-term memory impairment.
All right, great. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to start wrapping up now, just looking at the time. So I just want to thank you, Tara and Hazel, both so much for this great learning opportunity. I'm sure so many people here took something from it, and so thank you for that. I also want to thank everyone for attending this webinar and just for participating. We really appreciate all that you were able to provide for us today. We also learned just as much as you guys, so thank you. You are going to receive a short evaluation survey by email, so please share your suggestions and topics for future webinars. We would really appreciate that. We would also like to invite you to attend our upcoming webinar, which is going to happen on Tuesday, June 9th. Again, same time, so 9:30 in the morning, as well as 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And this webinar is going to be around supporting the activities of daily living with Mario Sokas and then myself, Lindsay Stacy. And registration information for this webinar will be emailed to you soon. So thank you again, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you all so much for the super important and essential work that you're doing. We hope everyone takes care and stay safe.